All right, hey, welcome back. I am in this video going to be talking about our specific project, the e-learning lab. So I'm just going to be going ideally from like an outside view into more of the folders and whatnot, discussing how things work, and then ideally going through like an example app to show you how it all works. And maybe not in full detail, but at least to get you up to speed on what the development looks like and what it's been done maybe in the past. So just giving a brief overview of the different items you can see right now. So we have a few text files that aren't really substantial. These hold like a secret key, password, runtime. Those aren't really email. So those are kind of just placeholders. And their contents are stripped and put in our settings.py. So those aren't really important. That's not generated by Django. Those are our own stuff. README is just what you see on our GitHub. To tell you a little bit more about the project. The requirements.txt, if you see this, this is all the different Python libraries, packages. I forget what they're called exactly, but all of those different, probably packages since you're installing them, that are needed to run the project. And we usually run this from our virtual environment so that it's isolated and rather than system-wide specific to this project. The README, as I said, it's kind of just a lookup to show everything that's being done. Our manage.py, so this is auto-generated. It's a command line utility for executing Django commands from within your project. The database SQLite is generated when you run migrations, I believe. It's essentially just our database. You can't see anything in here because it's either binary or, yeah, this error. You can't see it, essentially. At least not in any human readable form. So last thing is like get ignore. So this ignores everything that we don't need. This is just like a Django one. So for instance, you see the virtual environment is being ignored and won't be committed to GitHub. And I think that's it for these kinds of things down here. So assets and static. So static is actually what we use to serve our static assets. What are static assets? So our static assets are essentially, let me see, our static files where we can serve them onto the front end based off of the images or pictures that we as developers are adding. So this would be specific things. So if you go to our website, you can see, for instance, on the home page, there is a cube. So let me see if I can pull that up, maybe. So e-learning lab, there we go. So this would be a static asset. So this is being brought from one of our resources in the backend, and I believe you can find this in as a source. So if you go into our static folder, you can find all these being statically served. So that's all in our static file in our project. And assets, I believe, has the same thing really, except collect static. Oh, okay. So collect static will bring everything from throughout your project into the static folder. So you see some of these other like I guess folders in here. These are assets from other parts of the other applications really. But you see all of these things outside the folders, they're just copied over when we run collect static. So I believe we could have technically added them directly, but if you run collect static, they'll be brought over from assets anyway. So we might have set it up so that we put all our new photos in assets, and then when we run collect static, they get brought into static, and this way we can render them in our HTML templates. So that is the assets in static folder explained in I don't know if that's super clear, but that's essentially what they do. So static will show all the images, or will be a place to grab those images from. The media, so media is used for utilizing the file API. So I don't know if this is technically hooked up to CD, I think it's CDK editor, one of our packages that we installed. But essentially, if you used a file upload API or the image upload API, they would be moved to this media file. And Django has some of those APIs natively supported. If you go into the docs, you can have those. You can add them to your models and handle them through forms and whatnot. So I believe that's it. And then before I go into components, so components is a little bit of a misnomer, I feel, at least compared to general, my experience working with, for instance, React or some other framework. So components are pretty much apps in which they have their own models, their own views and templates, and they're just brought together in our virtual learning lab folder. And this is kind of the root of our project, I would say, even though not everything falls underneath it. So it's a little interestingly organized, but it all works. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit about how that works. So going into this, you can see there's usually going to be a templates folder, and that's just going to have some HTML, some fragments, some kind of information stored there. And I can go into more detail through our example. Some other things, ASGI and WSGI. Let me see if I can remember what these are. So I know WSGI is utilized to serve your project for, let me just get off this. So WSGI is used to serve your project on WSGI compatible web servers. And then ASGI is the same thing, but for ASGI web servers. So, and I think this is only supported for Django 3, actually, so it's more recently been added. Our init.py tells Python that this folder is a Python package. The URLs, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. The URLs contain project level URL configs, and by default, it contains a single URL pattern for the admin. And if you see this, so starting out, it'll only have this, but we added everything else to it. And I think that's all for the URLs for now. I'm going to go in depth for the settings. So for settings, we have base directory, static root, which might be declared twice actually. And that just shows us where our static file is. Secret key, and I mentioned like all these text files, we're just stripping a lot of the values from there. Debug true is very important. You want to have it false for production, for sure. Otherwise, users will see things that they probably shouldn't be seeing. Or we want to display a curated error page rather than getting a debug error page. So we want to show a nice message saying you tried to get something that doesn't exist, or you did something wrong. We don't want to show them a whole bunch of code or where in the code the error originated from or whatnot. So true in development, false in production. Now our allowed host is just where it can be hosted or where you can access it from. So like localhost, Heroku, our actual website. This is an incorrect URL that isn't being used for sure. And then some other some other address as well. And that's what the allowed hosts are. Our installed apps. So installed apps, you must tell Django that you have installed it. and it usually has like these pre-added ones, and then we added all the rest either by creating our own or importing an existing package as an application. And inside every app, Django creates an app.py um, where we have let me see, I guess it's not visible. Oh yeah, apps.py, and it configures the name of that app essentially. Anyway, not super important, but if I go back to my settings, something you need to add all your new apps here, and your database models won't be recognized unless they're here as well, so that's really important to have. All the things we've created are entitled components, and everything we've imported. Okay, so everything except for this quiz app under components is what we've made. Everything else has been imported except for these things just came with Django. Okay. Middleware, you don't need to change these unless you're adding like white noise if you're doing static file serving on a specific host or whatnot if you so desire. And a lot of these are just security stuff. I'm not going to talk about this. Feel free to read them on the docs. The root URL config defines our root URL config. Wow, what does that mean? So that means all our URLs are going to stem from this app. So from the Virtual Learning Lab app, from their URLs. So this is where every request is going to go through to check if it's going to actually exist. So it's going to go here. And then let's say I'm searching for a particular course in courses and I'm passing in like an ID or whatnot to get that course. So in order to find that URL, Django, I believe it might be smarter than this, but it's going to iterate through every single available URL to find that. So it's going to check. Now, obviously, if you pass in courses / something, it'll probably skip these two and straight go to courses. But it will go through all of the, so for a normal request, let's say we don't know what it is, it'll go through admin, all their URLs, then it'll go to student, and then for the student, it'll look in all of the URLs that student has. So if you go into an app, for instance, student, which I'm just talking about, it'll look through all these paths. And that is kind of the process. So it's going to be going through every single of these paths and looking for that URL. And it does this really quick. So it's not really that noticeable that if there are issues. But if it isn't found, it'll throw an error and it'll be displayed to the user. So that is the URLs. Let me go back to settings. So for settings, we have talked about the root. Okay, templates. So Django has a few template engines. No need to really concern yourself about this. This is the template engine we're using. Where we can find our templates. So I don't know if these are all of them, but we add our templates from our apps in here as well, just to make it more obvious. I don't know if that's technically required. Like this is definitely spelled wrong and it's working fine, so I don't think it's super needed, but I could be wrong. And then app starters, I'm not actually sure what that means exactly. I haven't looked into that. Options, so context processors. So this is actually a lot of what is rendered out in terms of errors and whatnot. So it usually shows some great detail. WSGI application, so I mentioned that's for hosting on WSGI web servers, databases, so we're only using the generated normal SQLite. If you want to connect like Postgres or MariaDB or some other DB, you need to configure this correctly, and I think it's a little more involved than just this since it's like a file that we're currently using as our DB. Auth password validators. That's just validation for passwords. Not going to go into too much detail. Crispy template pack. So this is for our Crispy forms. I'm just using Bootstrap for, since that's what we're styling with for now. Internationalization, you can look into this if you want. Static URL, static root again. Yeah, that's a redundancy. This just defines a lot of where our media, where our static is found and whatnot. CDK editor. Okay, so this must be working if we have like files within our media for that particular year or whatnot. So it must have been working at least at one point. Yeah, I don't know too much about that. Someone else set this up for us, so that's why I'm still like trying to learn some things. And then email. So this occasionally changes. We're just using SMTP with Gmail, and just some more stripping and whatnot for those values. Okay, and that's it for the settings that I want to go through. So now I'm going to jump into a app. And it's already been 15 minutes. Yeah, I will jump into a component and discuss it in depth. So this video might be a bit long, just be aware of that. You might want to pause here and just take a break and then come back. I don't think I'm gonna go through these all just because I will explain the ones that we've built. So we built this admin panel, which is an abstraction on top of the admin site. We've built, I'll actually show you that. So admin panel, so that's just this page. I actually don't even think there's models in there. Maybe I could be wrong. Yep, no models. Literally just abstraction. So we built that out. We built these courses. We built the discussion board. So I built these fragments. It's not an app though. We built home. No, we didn't do that. We built profile and we built student. So I guess it would have been more important if I told you we didn't build the essay, the multiple choice, the quiz, or the true and false. So we didn't build out the quiz. So if you're confused about that, you're going to have to do a little bit more digging into the code since it's pretty complex. And probably they're more familiar with Django, I would say. But if the quiz never needs to be changed or whatever, that is always an option. So I'm just going to go in depth for the discussion board since that's what I built out primarily last semester. And our discussion board is a feature, and I'll just show that right now actually. Let's go to wrong one. Okay, let's go to cybersecurity awareness and then go to their discussion boards. So you can see we got a list of discussions as well as a form to create a new discussion if you're staff. So, and then you can view that discussion and you can comment on it. So test. So comment that test. And then since I'm a staff, I have an ability to delete as staff. So that might have been a mistake, but we'll see. And then you can also reply, test. And you can view those replies. So this is a very simple discussion board, but you can delete things easily. And there was some cool things to learn, such as pagination and whatnot. And I'll just go into the code now. So for a discussion board, I don't know why these are only opening in one tab, but I'm just going to go through models first, then views, then URLs and templates. Also forms, I guess, somewhere in there. But let's just look at the models. So when you're developing these things, you need to consider what is needed for that specific component that you're trying to add. So in this case, I did a bit of research on what does a form look like, what kind of abilities do we want to have. what kind of comment structure do we have? Do we want to make it have multiple replies? Do you want to be able to reply to another reply? Do you need to handle all these recursive calls? Do you need to create a tree structure? Do you need to do something advanced? And there are packages to do that, but ultimately I decided that we just need something simple. So we need to have something to hold the discussion, something to hold the comments for that particular discussion, and then one layer of replies for that. So everything has one layer. So I guess one, yeah. Well, no. I guess the discussions can have multiple comments, but it's fairly straightforward. You have a discussion, you have multiple comments, you have multiple replies for that one comment that is above it. So looking into this, we import from Django.db models, and then I also imported some useful things. A lot of these aren't even being used. So for instance, we have the auth to get the user model, which I like using on occasion. Django URLs, I imported reverse. That just makes it easier to handle some situations where you only have the entity. So if you passed in a specific entity, you could go to that URL immediately rather than having to pass in specific arguments or whatnot. It could auto-generate those values and direct you to that template. Straightforward. Some other fields or values, datetime, validators to make sure nothing was profane. And looks like I didn't need this. And then I also brought over Django Vote. I did to support voting for Django. And I wanted to be able to upvote things. And I guess downvote as well. Do I have downvotes? I don't know. I think I only have upvotes. But yeah, I brought that in. So just going into a model. So that's a little too specific for like a general case. You have these fields and you have different values for this. So I knew the discussions. I wanted a discussion for each course at least. So specific discussions for each course. I needed that discussion to have a title that was unique to it, and I wanted it to be created. I wanted to know who it was created by, what it contained. So I just needed to make some a basic like description, updated on, created on, um, and then some functions to help define what it was. So like in this instance, ordering. So these meta parts don't need to be here, but I ordered it in the order of created on. And I have a way to define itself, the absolute that I talked about earlier. So I could pass in this discussion that I fetched, and then I would automatically get redirected to that URL that contains that discussion. Okay, so now I go to comment. I have a parent discussion, which has a foreign key to that discussion. If that discussion is deleted, I delete this comment. And then I have some other options like related name is comments, the to field is ID. Okay, and then I have created by, again, content, created on, updated on, is removed. So if a comment was deleted, I would change that to true essentially. And then I would either completely delete the comment or just state that it was deleted if there were replies. And if all the replies got deleted, I would essentially delete the comment at the same time. So it's a bit of a working need, I guess I amount of work that was required. I have the ordering. I overwrote the save, and so I think this was just for updating and whatnot. Oh no, this was for updating when I updated it or whatnot. And then I just called the save function on itself. And the final thing is the reply. I guess I have the vote model passed in. You can see there's hidden fields or whatnot. And the reply is pretty much the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing as a comment. Just it applies to a comment. So I could have actually made an abstract class, um, and then these could have inherited some of the values from there. But that's kind of what the models look like. Moving on, I'm going to go to the views. Now, I just take this approach because it seems logical to me. But if you want to work on the templates first and put in some mock data, or if you want to work on the views first and understand, oh, I'll need this data from this spot, so maybe I can understand what needs to be sent to the front end, and then understand, oh, I need this back end or this model to create such a look. That might be a good way to approach things. So there's many different ways to do this, and honestly, it's Django allows you to have designers who are working on the templates and also have like back-end gurus working on the views and the models, and hardcore coders just developing things and in different modules or whatnot, different files. So the order is up to you, really. I usually hop around a lot, but I usually start with the models, just because it makes sense to me. All right, getting back to this. So we have our views.py. And our views.py essentially handles the request, like I've said before, and takes in parameters and renders something. So if a response is returned, it should probably be in the views.py of your app. So in this situation, I'm going to be rendering out all the discussions to a specific page for that course. So in order to get that, I'm taking a request, and I'm also taking the course ID. If I don't have that course ID, I don't really know what discussions I need to grab. So I'm grabbing all the discussions, and then I'm filtering based on the courses where the ID field is the one that's passed in. And if I go to courses, I believe the to field is the ID, so that's kind of why this is working. I could be wrong though. Actually, let's check. Let's check to see if this does say to field ID. Okay, I don't know if it's here that it's defined, or it might be in the courses, but that's how I'm filtering those. And then I'm checking. So if I get no discussions that are available, I'm going to render the not exists HTML that I've created. And I don't even need to pass a context to that because it's just the same page whenever I don't get anything. Something a little more complex is a form. So I showed you a bit on this previous page. There's a form here for staff members to create new things. So if this needs to be created, you need to have a form that is rendered. And to do that, I created my own form in forms.py, so I might jump into that soon. But I started with, so I have a new discussion, and this will essentially be my new, it will be my new discussion that will be submitted if it's valid. So if there's a post request that occurs, I'm going to be creating a discussion form and passing in that request post value. And then if the discussion form is valid, I am going to create a new discussion, and So I'm just gonna read this out. So I'm gonna create the discussion object, but not save it to the database yet. And I'm gonna assign the current course to that discussion board. And then since that wasn't a field that was being entered, because no one's just gonna type in a really long course ID, so I'm gonna need to set that by myself. And then created by, I need to set that as the user, and then I can save it to the database. And new discussion.save, and I think I overwrote that, didn't I? No, not that one. I overwrote the comment. Okay, but you see how there's kind of some considerations you need to make, and then you want to set the form back to the original state or whatnot. And if you're not getting a post request, you just want to render out the normal field, the normal form before it occurs. And let's see, and ultimately you need to pass that as the context. So I'm passing in the discussions to render out all the discussions if it makes this far. And then I also want that form to appear. So I'm rendering based on that request to this discussions HTML with this context. And this is being called when this URL is accessed. So when you go to that URL, it's going to call this view, and this view is going to execute. And based on what it gets, it's going to render a web response. And if there are no discussions, it'll render a not-exist HTML. Otherwise, it'll render the template that I desire. So that's discussions, and that might be too complex to talk about. And yeah, I think that's sufficient enough to just talk about the discussions. I'm debating whether going into this discussion detail. No, this is too complex. If you need to know about pagination, go on to Django's docs or look into some resources that are there. I think I commented this fairly decently, so if you need to understand what's going on, go there. This probably could have been abstracted now that I'm looking at it, but I mean, we all are learning and whatnot as time goes on, so feel free to take a look at that or not if you need to. So that's the views for the discussion that I went over, discussions. So, and I mentioned for the URL, so we have views, it's called discussions, and we're rendering out discussions.html and this form. So this is the form I made, and Django makes it easy, so I just declared a meta class, and I said the model was the discussion. So now I have access to all those fields, and I only want to select the title and content. And then you don't have to, I don't think you even need to declare these two, but I just did this to format things interesting in a clear way and have this kind of, I guess, guidance there for the staff members. So that is forms, and these get brought in to the view through the discussion board form, getting imported at the top. Yeah, this top here. And it's rendered on the page. So the last thing I'm going to be showing, oh, actually no, there's a few more things. So admin.py, I'll do this before the templates just real quick. So you need to register these on the admin page for admins to create these things. In the case of the discussion, you can create it by the form I rendered on the page already. So if we didn't have an admin page, we'd essentially have to create all those CRUD operations, which wouldn't be too hard, but it would be a little more time consuming than just doing this. So I'm creating a subclass, essentially, discussion admin, based off of the model admin class that already exists. And in this, you can see, let me show you to make it more obvious. E-learning lab, admin panel, and admin page. So discussions. So if I go to discussions, I see courses, title, created on. If I go here, it looks like I have courses, title, created on. So that's the list display, it's the top. And you can filter by, it looks like in this case, courses only. So let's see, courses. Can I sort by title? Oh, I can sort by title. Maybe I can, oh, the filter is on the right. Okay, so that's what that means. So you can select any of these courses and whatnot, and then it will filter by that course. So that is cool. And then field sets. So field sets are what are inside, and it looks like the search field is the same. So once you create, let's say I'll create a new discussion. So these field sets are the same ones that match what I put in here. So connect discussion board to course, fields, courses. So now if I go here, connect discussion board to course, fields, courses, and then I can select that course. There might be a way to pre-populate this. I haven't looked into that. But right now it's just selecting Java programming every single time. I think that's because the default course is Java programming. So if you go to the course model, the default will be that value, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. And the only thing else to consider is, so I did this for all of them. You need to use this function from the admin.site. You just need to register that particular model with the admin model so that it knows it's linked up and whatnot. All right, and last thing for this video is just discussing the templates. So I only am going over the discussions because I feel like that's sufficient. Maybe. Okay, the discussion details is way more complex, but I will show you a little bit about how this works, at least in a basic way. So this is the HTML, but it's not strictly HTML since you're having these different insertions occur. So the first thing, I'll just go top down as much as I can. So it extends base2 base2.html. So if I go to base2 HTML, and you would only know this is located in here just from looking through the site. So this is what the base HTML2 looks like. So we're loading a static file. So that means we have access to all our static assets. We have this HTML up top. So really look into HTML, just you don't need to know much, just the basics. And you can understand a little bit about what's going on. So, and then there's some scripts that are bringing things in, links and whatnot. The most important part is this block. So we have a block of content, and essentially right in between this, we can insert whatever we want, as long as we're extending that HTML. So we're extending base HTML, base2.html, so we can insert all our discussion information in there. And we do that by declaring it. This is the block page content and end block at the end. Another thing I'm doing is loading crispy forms tags, and this just prettifies the form that I generated at the bottom here. And we'll see how that's applied a little bit more. So div ID wrapper, so that's just a way to recognize that or whatnot. And I'm including the sidebar.html with context variable being discussions 0. So this is something I recently discovered, and the only reason I'm doing this is because we had sidebar in so many of our different apps that I felt that it was necessary to abstract it to fragments. So if we go into our sidebar, we can see that we had a whole bunch of different like context variables being passed here, but it varied app to app. So this name would be different for each app based on what we were getting passed in. But we always needed to grab the course's ID from there. So in this case, we're just substituting this value for whatever context value we're getting from the view. So in this case, we're grabbing our discussions, but we want the first one in maybe, let me see if I can find another example. So in this one, okay, that's the models. I need to go into views. All right, in this one, we have like posts, for instance. So we're grabbing post 0. So like these names are different, and in our context, it'll be referred to as this. So if those values are different, it's not going to work exactly. So we need to pass in what our context variable is in order for it to map to the correct, I guess the accessible variable is how I would call it. So we can only just, so our actual context variable is discussions. So in this case, we're grabbing the first one and we're passing it as a context variable to our sidebar so that it's substituted in for this context variable, or rather the context variable is that value and we can grab the ID of that course. So hopefully that was a bit not too confusing, but that's how we would include that sidebar with that value. From here we have a content wrapper, and we have some classes. This is how you do styling, and we're utilizing Bootstrap, so that's why you see some of these styles like column large 12, column medium 12. And I would encourage you to get familiar with grid, and even myself, just to get more familiar with grid layouts and understanding how things work to get better responsive design. We also have like a toggle menu, and this is just allows you to expand and collapse certain things. Here we have our discussion courses and discussions. So if I go back here, if I go to view site, my courses, cybersecurity awareness, discussion boards. So discussions. Ooh, that might not be rendering actually. Okay. Yeah, that wouldn't render because I didn't grab the title actually. So it's just saying there's discussions here, and then based on that, so just to reiterate, all this like HTML is just for structuring. All the classes are for the styling, and all of these tags that are within curly braces are part of the templating engine, essentially, that allows us to conditionally render things dynamically. And in this case, we're checking if the user is staff, and then we're rendering the ability to create a new discussion button. And this button only brings you to that form, so it actually doesn't actually create a new discussion. So that's just the header section. Then we have our entries. So we're just iterating through all our discussions and then putting them in a box. So go back here. So we're just putting this in a nicely formatted box and just displaying it in a friendly way for users. Okay, and then something more important is the URL takes in course ID and a specific primary key. So I want to view a discussion, so I need to pass in for that URL the ID and the primary key. So if I need to go to discussion URLs, discussion detail, it's the course ID and the primary key. So these will match in the URL, and it will be handled by the view. So if I go to the views, and then I go to discussion detail, these parameters will be the same as the URL, will be the same as those that are passed into the template in order to be able to access them. So you need to make sure that the views, the templates, and the URLs are in harmony in order to render that page. Going back, and this is just a convenient way to do this and the suggested way to perform URL movements throughout the project. Okay, and I guess this was the end of the for loop. And then finally, we want to render our form. So we only want to render this if the user is staff. And there might be some better ways to handle this on the back end now that I'm thinking about it. But I guess this is an appropriate way as well, based on what I know so far. So we have a link that says create new discussion. We have a card with some shadows and styling. Create new discussion. And here's our form. So forms are really simple in Django. We have a method called post. And if you go to our views, we check to see if the method is post. So that matches there. Sorry. Then we perform a specific action afterwards. So in this case, we're navigating to the discussions with the same course ID. So this is essentially just a refresh. And you can actually handle this with the views. I'm not sure of the trade-offs, to be honest. Then we have our CSRF token, which prevents cross-site request forgery. At least it helps mitigate that. And then we have our discussion board, and I'm applying this /crispy using a tag. So that's how you utilize a tag, and it styles it as a crispy form. Finally, we have a submit button, and on this huge form, I know, right? 3 lines for this with some styling on it, and then just a name for it, create discussion. And this was all generated if you were a user that was staff, otherwise it wasn't shown. And that's the end of that template. Hopefully this video kind of helped. I realize it was long, but I hope you kind of have a better understanding. I recommend you look through all the other components and get like a gist of how the data is being moved from our models into our views and then shown on the templates. And really the most frustrating part I usually find is making sure the template, so the template URL, so these parameters in the URL with that name, so this name has to be the same as this name. And this is so that if we change this URL, it doesn't freak out. But it also needs to have those parameters passed in. And if these things don't match, you're going to be thrown errors, and it's going to either say things like reverse not found or some other kind of error. And Django's debug should help out, but it's kind of a little bit of a headache if you aren't super familiar with it. I believe that is all for today, and if there's any need for like HTML, CSS, I think other people probably are better at explaining things than me online, but if that's needed, or if people find need to create Bootstrap, I might do that as well. We'll see if it gets added to this playlist or what not. But yeah, I encourage you to look through the code, learn as much as you can, and just have fun learning web development. This is a lot of fun stuff that can be frustrating at times, but really satisfying once you get it right. And it's a learning process, and it's just a great opportunity to discover more, not only about how you like think through things, but also how you can help others and how you can plan things and whatnot, and can be successful throughout the process. So thank you, and I will see you guys later, potentially. Yeah, have a good time working on the project. Thanks.